In this video, I'm going to be painting up a whole brigade of cuirassiers for the French Napoleonic army. Looking at this 100 Days book, I am specifically going to be painting a brigade out of the Quatre Bras order of battle, specifically the 2nd Corps 6th Division, which had 2 regiments of cuirassiers attached to it. These 2 regiments came from the 3rd Reserve Cavalry Corps 11th Cavalry Division, 2nd Brigade, which is the 8th and 11th Cuirassier regiments. By the year 1815, these were typically under strength at only 3 squadrons in one and 2 in the other. While you look through the sprues from the starter set, you do not want to use this set. Any of these with the curved sabers or lances are another type of cavalry, and that's for another video. The sprues that you do want are the ones with the straight swords like this. These are the cuirassiers. And of the 3 sprues that you get about 8 of these models. Now for what I'm trying to do in this video, I need a few more than that. So I'm also going to include this one model here, which is not exactly a cuirassier, but is very close. Please note that the ones here that have long guns are not cuirassiers, they're actually carabiniers. You do not want to use these. This is for another type of unit. Use your set of favorite hobby clippers and start clipping off all the cuirassiers only. Leave all the other types of units on the sprue so they don't get mixed up. You want to cut out about 25 of these cuirassiers because you're going to be making 5 squadrons. So that's going to be a total of 5 bases with 5 of these cuirassiers per base. You'll also want standard bearers and musicians. Over here are the 2 poles that you can use for standard bearers. Since there are 2 regiments, you'll want 1 standard bearer per regiment, so cut out both of these. Next, for the musicians. These tiny little things right here are trumpets. Go ahead and cut those out and put them on the side. They're really small, really easy to lose, so be careful. Now it's time to convert some of the cuirassiers to these special models. What you're going to do is clip off the hands of these models and replace it with either the staff or with the trumpet. Use some good plastic cement, and then after that carefully place the flagpole onto the wrist that you had snipped off earlier. And also a pro tip, you'll want to apply a little bit of glue down here by the horse. This helps anchor 2 points of contact, which makes it really stable. Since there are 2 regiments, you'll want to do this with 2 standard bearers. Just repeat the process on the other one and you will have 1 banner per regiment. For the musicians, you'll want to clip off the sword, not the entire wrist, and then apply glue onto the mouth as well as onto the wrist. And then very carefully handle these tiny trumpets. Use a toothpick or something similar to push it into position, and once it's dried, it'll look like the rider is playing a trumpet, like this. Just like the standard bearers before, you'll need 2 of these because there are 2 regiments. Repeat the process with the other musician. Like in all my videos, I like holding on to the base of the models because they're so much easier to handle. However, if you mount all of the models onto it, you're going to have no brush access whatsoever. So if you only mount 3 into the base, you're going to be able to get brush access much easier, and this is my preference. You can safely go ahead and mount 3 models in these locations with plastic glue, and then once you put them on, they're going to be permanently on, and then it'll be a very easy thing to just hold onto the base as you paint. There will be 2 models per base that are just going to be loose, and I'll show you how to mount them afterwards. Now these special models, the ones that are trumpeters as well as standard bearers, you're going to be putting them in these 2 empty slots right here. They're usually going to flank the leader. For all the loose models that are not on bases, I'm going to put them on a paint stick or this little shim stick with some double-sided tape. Just cut out tiny pieces of double-sided tape and mount them to the bottom of each of the loose figures. Then just stack them one after another onto the stick and you will have an entire stick full of cuirassiers. These bases, just for priming, I'm also going to put them on a paint stick like this. It just makes it easier during the priming process. By the way, don't forget your brigade commander. This guy can also be mounted onto his base and then apply it onto the paint stick here for priming. Before you prime anything though, you want to make sure to apply some sort of masking tape or something right in these areas where you're going to be putting plastic glue later on. I just used regular Scotch tape, peel off small little chunks like this, and then put it in these in-between areas on the base. So when you prime these, the primer will not get in these areas and prevent you from applying plastic glue. Onward to priming, you'll just want to put a simple white primer on everything. This allows all the colors to shine later on. Apply it with either an aerosol primer or with an airbrush like I'm showing here. White is all you need, no fancy slap chopping or zenithal needed. These models need all the help they can get to get the vibrant colors out, so leave it simple. A simple white prime will do. After the priming is dry, you want to leave all the individual models on your paint stick. It makes them easier to handle later on. However, the ones that are already base, go ahead and remove them from the stick. It'll be much easier to maneuver while you're painting them. Next, use some hobby pliers or tweezers and simply pull off all the scotch tape you had laid down earlier. It has done its job protecting those areas. Next, we're going to be painting the horses, and Cuirassier horses in particular tend to be black, brown, and dark bays. So for this, I'm going to be using 4 colors: Sand Golem, Dark Wood, Greyfloor Grey, and Grim Black. I start out with Sand Golem Speed Paint. This is a very nice color to use for Dark Bay. This is basically a reddish brown color, and it works really well for this application. I apply it onto Brigade Commander's horse, and then I also apply it randomly onto other horses on the paint stick as well as on the bases. One interesting note from history is that during peacetime, the French used to assign different colored horses to different people of different roles. For instance, the musician would get one colored horse, the standard bearer another colored horse, the captain would get one color, the colonel would get another color, and so on and so forth. However, by the time Waterloo came by, this was basically thrown out the window and whatever horses were available were used. Although I tend to think that the 4 colors that I'm using here were fairly standard during Waterloo for Cuirassier. So go ahead and just randomize the colors of the horses throughout the squadrons just to make them a little bit more interesting to look at. The one thing you'll notice is as I'm painting these horses, I tend to stay away from the tail and the mane. The reason is I'm going to be painting each of these in a different color. For instance, on this horse with Sand Golem, I use some dark wood speed paint, and this gives it a little bit of variation in color and makes it look like a different horse. And then I go on to the next horse. The only golden rule is do not paint the mane and the tail the same color as the rest of the horse. I know, seems like common sense, but sometimes you just have to say it out loud. So for instance, over here, I have a horse that is gray. I'll put some Sand Golem onto its mane and its tail, like I'm showing here. And then I do the same thing with the next horse and so on. So with just 4 simple speed paint colors, I'm able to make a wide variation of horses that really look great standing next to each other. After you're done with the horses, you'll want to use Grim Black and a detailing brush to start working on the briddles. All the briddles on the horses are going to be painted black, and this Grim Black speed paint is really good at applying black onto these briddles. Because it is so low viscosity, it actually flows really easy onto all the surfaces. Here I apply it onto all the front areas like the headpiece, the throat latch, the brow band, the cheek piece, and the nose band. And when you paint the reins, you want to make sure that the area closest to the hand is fully painted black as well. There's a big empty area there that you want to make sure is fully covered. Don't forget the crupper at the rear end of the horse and also the girth underneath it. Next, I'm going to work on the faces of the models with peachy flesh. I'm going to apply a generous amount of this speed paint onto the face, and in the case of the brigade commander, you'll also want to paint his hands. Now for the rest of the cuirassier, you'll only need to paint their faces. They all wear white gloves, so do not paint their hands. Now I'm going to use hardened leather speed paint on all the standard bearers. So the staff that they're carrying, I'm going to make it look like wood by applying this rich brown onto it. I move on to polished silver metallic speed paint, and I apply this onto all the swords. I also apply it onto the sheaths that are on the left hand side of each miniature. Now I chose this over broadsword silver because this is very bright and I wanted the cuirassier to really stand out on the battlefield. So giving them this silver on their swords and later on their breastplates really gives them that regal look. I move on to the next metallic speed paint, Glittering Loot, which is a really bright and rich gold. I apply this onto all the eagles on top of the standards, and the speed paint also goes onto the hilts of the swords. The brigade commander's sword is sheathed, so its hilt is actually on this side. I use this gold metallic paint on the crest, which is the top portion of each of the cuirassier's helmets also. I now use brazen copper, or honestly you could also use Talos bronze. In hindsight, I probably should have used Talos bronze, it's a little bit brighter, but it's okay. This is going to go onto the trumpets of all the musicians. There would be 2 of them total in these 2 regiments. Onward to the uniforms. Some fun facts about these 2 particular regiments. The first one, the 8th Cuirassier Regiment, was actually probably one of the more renowned ones, and they were known to be well equipped. So I decided to paint all of them with their cuirass breastplates. My favorite painting guide shows the exact same thing. And while the 8th Regiment was well equipped, the 11th Regiment was actually almost the complete opposite. By this time in the Waterloo campaign, they basically ditched all of their breastplate armor and just wore blue tunics. I should mention that the brigade commander's name is Marie-Adrien François Guiton, and while most pictures show him in full cuirassier regalia, this model comes with a bicorn, which is alright, a lot of officers wore that cap. Before I paint the uniforms, to not confuse myself, I set aside 2 bases. These are going to be the 11th Regiment and they're going to get the blue tunics. Also, these models that are missing, I'm going to delegate 4 of them to have the blue tunics. Make sure there's always a musician and a standard bearer in that lot. I'm going to go ahead and set aside everybody that's part of the 11th Cuirassier Regiment, and everybody else is going to get the silver breastplate. So use the polished silver metallic speed paint and apply it onto the breastplate front and back. General Guiton does have a breastplate, and even though the model shows a vest, you can still paint silver over it. As long as it's laid down properly, it's fairly convincing at this very small scale. I continue on here applying the silver onto everything else except the 11th Regiment. For the 11th Regiment, even though all the troopers wear blue tunics, I'm going to give their leader, Colonel Courtier, a cuirass breastplate. Being the lone figure with a silver breastplate helps him stand out. I'm going to go back to Sand Golem speed paint, and this is going to be applied onto the pants of the 8th Cuirassier Regiment. They wore a darker pants, and I'm going to use Sand Golem to represent this. As always, make sure that all of the 11th Regiment are out of the way. Then after that, just go ahead and apply the Sand Golem brown onto all the pants. You may have also noticed that the colonel for the 8th Cuirassier Regiment actually has gray pants. For this, I'm going to be using Greyford Gray speed paint on only this one model. Next, I will use Palette Bone speed paint, which will give me a lighter shade of brown, which I will use on the pants of the 11th Cuirassier Regiment. Basically, everybody besides the leader model or the colonel is going to get this light brown pants. Only the colonel gets white pants. General Guiton's pants are also this palette bone color. The tunics of the 2 musicians are the exceptions. These are going to be painted green, and for this I'm going to use Orc Skin speed paint. It gives it a very nice, vibrant, bright green that works well on these tunics. Now comes Warlord Blue, which will give these French their distinct signature appearance. Again, for all the Cuirassiers in the 11th Regiment, which are basically 2 stands worth of models, their tunics are entirely blue. They do not wear any silver breastplates except for their leader. He is the only one in this regiment with a cuirass on. Now, anything with a cuirass, you'll just want to paint their sleeves. Don't paint the gloves, leave those white. Otherwise, your sleeves are going to get this blue. So go ahead and paint up any model with the silver breastplate this way. And that includes General Guiton. After the tunics are done, you'll want to move on to the saddlecloths. The lower saddlecloth is going to have basically the same blue with white trimming. So carefully lay down this Warlord Blue into these little recesses over here, and the speed paint should pull in these areas and make nice neat squares. If you make a few mistakes, don't worry about it. There is a touch-up step that comes later. Next, I'm going to go to Blood Red speed paint, and this is going to be going on several areas of these cuirassiers, namely their epaulettes on their shoulders. There are also small streaks right by their armpits at the top of their arms. Use a fine point detailing brush to apply this red in those areas. On General Guiton, this goes on his collar and also on the lower part of his breastplate, right around the sash area, and you'll want to do the same for the back of the figure as well. The colonels for both regiments do not have red epaulettes, instead they have silver ones, so use the polished silver speed paint and apply it onto the epaulettes for those 2 leader models. Incidentally, General Guiton also has silver epaulettes, so don't forget to paint his shoulders too. Next, I use green black speed paint and I apply this onto all the riding boots of the Cuirassier. All of them will have basically knee-high boots, so paint them all black on both sides of the horses. And then after that, you'll also want to apply this black onto the helmets of the Cuirassier. You'll want to focus on the front or the crown of the helmet and also on the black pompon and tassel that runs along the back. While painting the tassels, remember to leave the musicians' tassels white. If you look at the painting guide, the musicians are actually the only ones in the Cuirassier that have white tassels. So carefully paint the helmet black but leave the tassels and the pompons white. You will also need grim black on the saddle and the saddle flap like shown here. So using your same detailing brush, carefully lay down this grim black into those areas. They should pool really nicely and make these areas look black, while the fringes, try to leave them as white as possible. If you overshoot a little bit, don't worry about it. There is a white step that will be coming up later. For General Guiton, his bicorn hat and his boots are going to be painted black. Next, I'm going to go back to Warlord Blue and apply this onto this saddle cover area behind the rider. So what I'm going to do here, just for unit distinction, is the 8th Regiment is going to get a solid blue saddle cover. I'm going to paint the entire thing blue. But when I move to the 11th Regiment, I'm actually going to only paint the bottom of the saddle cover blue and leave the top of it white, like it's a piece of linen or something on top. Visually on the table, I'm going to be able to quickly pick up the 11th Regiment versus the 8th Regiment, not just from their tunics, but also from the saddle cover. The Cuirassiers back then spotted a mustache on their faces, so I used black and any leftover browns and randomly applied them onto the riders' mustaches using a detailing brush. Next, I move on to demonic yellow acrylic paint, not speed paint, and I'm going to be using the same detailing brush and applying them onto the straps of the musicians. So this is going to be across the tunic, and also there are chevrons on both the musicians' arms. You want to do it for both the musicians for the 2 separate regiments. Next, I'm going to use matte white acrylic paint and the same detailing brush and apply them onto the cross straps on the riders. Some of the riders do not have cross straps. You can either fake one in or just leave it bare, but usually the ones that have cross straps have a little bit of a 3D feature on it, which makes it easy to lay down this white paint fairly neatly. However, if you overshoot or make a slight mistake along the way, don't worry too much about it. The washes that we'll be applying later will cover those mistakes up. You will also be using this white acrylic paint to clean up all the borders of the saddle cloths. So these units sported white trimmings around your saddle cloths. So go ahead and lay them down on these areas and especially cover up any overpaint that you might have done. This step is fairly important, so kind of take your time and do it correctly because it will give your models a nice crisp appearance if you do it right. Next, I use greedy gold acrylic metallic paint and I apply this with a detailing brush onto all the chin scales on both sides of the helmet. The reason why I'm using acrylic instead of speed paints is that it's very crisp once you're done with it, and with careful brushwork, you should be able to make the chin scales look very defined and very sharp against the faces. Again, this is a detailing step, and doing it correctly with very precise lines will make your models really stand out. Just a finishing touch on General Guiton, I'm going to apply a slight yellow on this little feature on his bicorn, and then apply a small dab of red right in the circular section on the top to give it the final look. One of the last steps is to use dark tone wash from Army Painter and apply it onto all the white gloves to give it more definition. You'll also be applying it onto the trimmings on the saddle cloths. The colonel in the 11th Regiment had white pants. Be sure to apply wash onto that. And really apply this wash onto anything that's white, including the cross straps, any of the exposed white linens, and so on. This just gives those areas a lot deeper shadow and makes it look really good. General Guiton has graying hair, so apply it onto the white of his head and it'll make it look gray. Onward to the flags. For this, I go to a website called warflag.com that gives you period-specific, historically correct flags. As you can see here, there is actually one for the 8th and the 11th Cuirassier Regiment for the French. This measures about a 1/4 inch, so you'll want to do a copy-paste, put it into something like Google Slides or PowerPoint, and scale the flag down to this 1/4 inch scale. After it's correctly sized, you can just go ahead and print it out and then cut it into both the flags for each of the regiments, and now it's ready to be glued on. You'll want to fold each of the 2 flags in half right along its seam, and then after that you'll want to use Elmer's glue and an old brush and then just apply it onto one side of the flag. Then carefully thread it onto the flag post and then squeeze it onto itself so that it adheres. While it's wet, you can add a little bit of wavering or folds to the flag to make it look a little bit more realistic. After this, you can start taking the loose models off of the paint stick and go to the next step, which is glue each of them on the bases. These 4 models without breastplates belong to the 11th Regiment, these 2 bases here, while these 6 with breastplates are going to belong to the 8th Regiment, which has 3 bases. Now on each regiment's leader base, the leader is going to be right in the middle, and flanking him is going to be the musician and the standard bearer. With all the painting and the flags complete, now it's safe to permanently cement all these models onto the bases. So apply plastic cement into the areas that you had masked earlier. This will allow you to have firm adhesion against plastic and not against the paint, which is why it's important to mask it. And then apply the models, first starting with the musician and the standard bearer, and then work your way down the rest of the line, applying all the rest of the loose models onto the remaining bases. Finish everything off with a nice application of green flocking. I really like battlefield grass from Army Painter. I apply it with Elmer's glue and an old brush on top of all the bases. Once you have enough glue on it, you can go ahead and dunk the entire base into the bin of flocking and then tap off the excess and it should stick in place. Finally, protect your work with 1 or 2 layers of matte clear varnish. Here is a spin around view of the 8th Cuirassier Regiment and the 11th Cuirassier Regiment with their distinctive lack of breastplates. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this was beneficial for you in your Warlord Games epic battles journey. I hope you'll follow along my series, and until the next time, happy hobbying.